The 360 on Energy and Carbon, hosted by 360 Energy. When it comes to utility data, there's a common misconception that it's fixed and beyond your control. However, that's far from the truth. 360 Energy has created an innovative AI-powered platform designed to simplify and automate the complex process of energy and emissions data management. Introducing Envirely. Envirely provides organizations with a comprehensive solution enabling efficient management of energy usage, cost reduction, and greenhouse gas emissions reduction in alignment with global standards. Welcome back, Dave and John.
Really good to be back.
You know, it feels like forever since the gang's been back. So I'm so excited to be back again, even though we don't have guests. We're the guests. This is great.
Me too. And this is one of our most consistent episodes. I mean, we record 2 episodes every single year that are the same, and it's this episode and it's our end of the year takeaways. So I think we're on our 4th COP, but this is going to be a really good one. Maybe even more. I can't remember. I think it's 4 though.
The question is, will we have the 5th?
Dun, dun, dun.
I mean, jumping ahead to the end of our thing, there will be another one, and there will be one after that. The next 2 have been scheduled.
All right.
So to kick off today's episode, and John is usually really good at answering this one, what was COP30 and where did it take place?
Okay, so let's pretend we've not done this before. And COP30, it stands for the 30th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, hence COP. And then this gets really good, to the UN, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, which is a landmark international treaty that was agreed in 1992, and is also parent to the Paris Agreement in 2015. So that's what it is. And the Conference of the Parties, put it into context, there were 198 parties to the UNFCCC, and 194 of them went to Belém in Brazil, where this was. So, trivia question, which 4 participants didn't turn up?
Okay, can I guess?
Go for it.
Okay, the first one's not that difficult. Yeah. United States.
Bing. Correct.
Okay, next. It's not a guess, actually. Australia didn't show up because it was expensive and they decided not to go. Is that correct?
No, the listing I've got, the US is the really big one missing.
Yeah. Yep.
Afghanistan, with all due respect, I don't think that was going to make a major difference. San Marino, again, very small country, and Myanmar. But you actually do touch on something with this, and that is that attending a COP can be expensive. And for some of the smaller nations, the less developed nations, they probably have a trouble to get together a group of 2 or 3 people to send there. So, on that basis, how many people were at Belém in COP30? Well, what we're looking at is somewhere north of 50,000 people. And that is the second highest attendance after, in fact, what was COP28 in Dubai. That was a monster. That was well over 75,000. But what I've noticed that's interesting since Dubai is in the classes of the people there, they have the parties, so they are the governments. They have observers, they have media, they have overflow, they have other staff. But what's happened since Dubai, a little chunk is in coming up, are virtual participants.
This was Lysandra's idea last year.
Yeah.
Lysandra, they were listening to our podcast.
They really were.
So we've had the highest number. I can't tell you the exact number. I've not worked that out. But we've had the highest number of virtual attendees in Belém. But talking numbers, and I like numbers on these things. We said that there were 55,000 delegates. On the protest day, because this was interesting, COP30 was in a democratic country where protesting is allowed. And on their protest day, they had 70,000 protesters turn out. And a lot of these were representing indigenous people. Now, other little interesting bits. Progress was hindered in some part because air conditioning failed and they got overheated. There was also a fire
Yes,
in
I
one
saw
of the
that.
pavilions, the blue
Yeah.
pavilion. Nobody was hurt. It just delayed processes more. But I found there's something quite, is it ironic, pretty, beautiful, circular or whatever, about people at a climate conference suffering because the air conditioning wasn't working.
I wonder if that caught their attention.
You wonder, okay, whilst we're messing around with figures, 1 in 25 people were from the fossil fuel industry.
Yes.
But this is the bit that gets me. You know, we're used to having meetings, aren't we? We're pretty good with them and that. There were 117 substantive agenda items that had to be addressed through the period. And this was from the 10th to the 21st of November. In fact, if you look at the full listing of the agenda, there were 145 items that needed to be addressed. But a lot of those were procedural things like opening the session, closing the session, that sort of thing. Then I got hold of, I followed some media, and they produced, I like this, they produced a concise overview of COP30. 22,000 words it was.
Wow.
But when we look at that, here's another thing. When you look at the COP site, they've got documents, and you can see what documents they've got. 62,127 documents. And during this conference, there were 977 what they call decisions. So this gives you a scope of the complexity administratively of a COP. And this COP is not significantly different other than it's on the increasing trend of more delegates. So a question we have to ask ourselves, does more delegates mean people are more interested in it or taking it more seriously?
And, playing devil's advocate, does more delegates slow down the progress?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because let's move on to one of the things. I'm not going to come to a summary of it, but one of the things that was a hot topic that was discussed was a fossil fuel roadmap. And this was the idea of having, and the language, I mean, the language in COPs is really interesting. And I've got something else to say on that buried somewhere amongst my bits of reminders here. But they had a number of countries who were refusing to sign because they wanted a fossil fuel pathway. Little analysis on that. 2/5 of the nation at COP30 were backing a fossil fuel roadmap. But those 2/5 of the countries only were responsible for producing 7% of the world's fossil fuel energy. So what we've got, and the Arabs in particular, and I'm using that as a general term and not a prerogative, the Arab states in general were very vehemently opposed to something that was a fossil fuel roadway. I think they know that they're going to run out of fossil fuels, but they want to be the ones controlling the transition. They don't want it being imposed on them.
And John, that was a similar situation I recall last year, that the fossil players continue to have a lot of sway and impact on decision making. And just looking at the economics, I guess that makes sense. But that's until that, in my view, they don't have the revenue or the money to move around like they have. I think they'll certainly always have a lot of sway until that changes. Do you see that being any different?
I do. I think the other thing that's always interesting in this, we were talking about what it costs to go to somewhere like a COP. Fossil fuel countries and fossil fuel companies, they know it's worth being there. It's worth spending the money to put lots of delegates there and to put people, because what we do know is an awful lot goes on outside the official sessions. I know one or two people who've been to COPs, and they actually say the side issues, things going on in the pavilions and things like that, are where it gets really interesting and things happen. But there is a lot of lobbying and pressure. And I think I've used this example before, but I will use it again. What, to me, shows the difficulty of coming up with a really good agreement in a COP. Let's just take the three of us, okay? And for the next 12 months, we have got to agree that we will only have one hot drink, one type of hot drink, and the three of us have got to have the same hot drink.
And we
So
know that's not going to work because
is it an
Lysandra,
Americano? Is
yeah,
it tea? Whatever.
I drink iced, as we all know.
yes.
Right? So we've got a problem. So to now take that to 194 participants and you want them all to agree on something. And then there are all subgroupings between these people. There's the fossil fuel grouping. There's the islands, the island states. There's the like-minded developing countries, and there's all different clusters of people. And quite rightly, they want to put forward what matters to them. So if you're a low-lying Pacific island, rising sea level really matters to you. So you want to do something about that. If you're indigenous people in Brazil, I think they've got a bit of a forest there and things like that, you want that protected. So you're going to be pushing for that. And then you're trying to get all of these people to end up with a text at the end of the day that they will all agree on. And that will not be the most ambitious plan possible. It's the least worst plan that everybody agrees on.
I think that's a last tagline summary.
Yeah. So, do you have another question? I mean, you asked me what the COP was. That's my first stab at talking about it. Can I just? I will share something else. Somebody did right. The text that's come out of this is a thing they call the global mutirao. I may be pronouncing that incorrectly, but mutirao is a Brazilian term for collective efforts. So global collective efforts is the text. And what they've pointed out in it, and the wording in it, it is incredibly light on active verbs. Things like resolves and invites, urges and things like that. The words that are really massively used are things like recognise, recalls, acknowledges, affirms, welcomes, emphasises, notes, underlines, takes note, stresses, reiterates, looks forward, celebrate. All of those kind of words don't drive things forward. There are some more active words in there. Strongly reaffirms, stresses, but
Yeah, I think especially in the beginning stages of these back-to-back COPs, I think those types of words were definitely, what we needed to start with. We needed a lot of countries to acknowledge things.
Yeah.
And over the last couple COPs, we've definitely seen that happen. But I think that as we progress with these, especially if they continue annually or regularly in general, there needs to be more of an emphasis on implementation and actual roadmaps and things that are going to drive change. And I'm not sure, I would say, like, based on what I've seen, and again, we all probably have different sources and things like that. I would say that this conference maybe talked more about roadmaps. I don't recall ever hearing about this ever before. I love a roadmap, but I'm also a project manager. So of course I love a roadmap. But to me,
they also talked about compasses and all terminology like that. But that in itself is good. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. And I think without again, we can sit there, we can all sit around a table and we can have a conversation and try to agree on something. That's great. But without actual actionable items or takeaways, what is the purpose of all this, right?
Yeah. Another aspect of trying to make decisions, I belong to a Rotary Club. Now, when you're in a Rotary Club, you're the president. You go to a meeting of presidents and they say, we want to try and do something. The best you can do is say, I will go back to my Rotary Club and see what they think and see if we can support it. And it's exactly the same for the countries. Very few of them are in a position there to actually say and agree to something there and then. But a couple of things that came out on the sidelines, because I think what I'm going to say is we haven't got a Paris Agreement. We haven't got a Kyoto Agreement. We haven't got a big groundbreaker like that. We've got incremental progress, possibly, with the COP30. But a lot of other things are going on, and there were two that grabbed my attention. One of them was, and I hadn't realised this, but when you're doing your nationally declared contribution, your NDC, what your country's going to contribute to greenhouse gases, you do not have to include GHG emissions associated with the military.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it suggested that military GHG emissions could be as much as 5% of total.
You know what, John? I don't think I've never heard or even anyone's ever addressed that.
No. So and I'm going to say this is where you're open-minded with your news sources. I found that in an article from Al Jazeera.
So
But
there'd be, go
another
ahead.
thing that was really, I thought was interesting, one of the longer decision documents, and I'm going to be careful with this because it's slightly complex, was the issue, and I haven't seen this arise before in the way that it has, the issue of gender came up in this COP. And in part, this is because, with due respect to our producer, but women have not been necessarily involved in the right way. They've possibly been disadvantaged. There's probably been all sorts of issues there. And one of the longer decision documents was about gender. And it summarising it at one level, it probably was saying, we've got to do better. We've got to make sure that we're not unintentionally discriminating against people based on gender. But before I'll let you come back on that, there was one, and this is where I say this is delicate, and I'm going to say this as it is. There was one interesting point at one part during these discussions. One of the participants there is the Holy See, which is the administration of the Vatican City. They were insistent that there are only two genders, and that's what they wanted in the documentation, that gender is based on biological sex, which is interesting with everything that's going on in the world. But yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think, especially given locations of previous COPs, some of these topics were never touched because it's very sensitive. All three of us sitting here come from first world countries. A lot of the times, these are not issues that we think about. But again, when you're talking more of a COP, you're having countries from all over the world with all sorts of different economic, social makeups. And I think it becomes a little, I understand the vision of having these conversations. I think these conversations are very important. At the same time, I do wonder, as we kind of creep through certain things, are COPs going to lose the general agenda where we all want all these governments to acknowledge climate change and have a roadmap forward? Because at the end of the day, you can't have parts of the world telling other parts of the world how to construct their government, and you can never do that. And I think it'll overcomplicate and lose sight of what COP is about. Not that I agree with any of that, obviously. It's just like I sometimes think that once we lose sight of why are we here and it gets too broad, that things are going to get messier.
Yeah.
I am in total agreement with you, Lysandra. So I understand. I'll just re-emphasize what you're saying. There's issues or challenges in other parts of the world, even parts of North America, as you might know.
Yeah.
But if we're dealing with climate change, we should stay focused on climate change and how to resolve it.
Especially when you're dealing with all these people with different backgrounds and conflicts, once you touch one other subject, for sure. This is already a touchy subject.
It's already touchy. So, but let me throw this in because and I hope I do this right. So if, let's say it's historically the male has been deemed as is the dominant and doesn't allow women in the past to be actively involved. If women can be actively involved and change for climate change, bring it on. Like friggin' bring it on.
It's more likely that it will happen if we have a better gender balance.
I think so. In fact, they find in businesses when you have a mixture, your business is more successful.
Yeah. Diversity of thought, yeah.
Yeah.
But the other thing I thought I'd share with you, I got hold of some remarks from the UN Climate Change Executive Secretary, a guy called Simon Steele, and he was talking during the closing plenaries, and I just picked a few things out of it. And he was saying, denial, division and geopolitics has dealt international cooperation some heavy blows this year. But friends, COP30 showed that climate cooperation is alive and kicking, keeping humanity in the fight for a livable planet with a firm resolve to keep 1.5 degrees C in reach. He then says, I'm not saying we're winning the climate fight, but we are undeniably still in it and we are fighting back. So that's interesting. He then went on and said, this year there has been a lot of attention on one country stepping back.
Who could that be?
Yeah. And he says, but amid gale force political headwinds, 194 countries stood firm in solidarity, rock solid, in support of climate cooperation. Okay, he says that the Paris Agreement is working, but I thought a couple of other things that he came out. The COP has started to deliver on these everyday concerns. This is things like, will I be able to pay my fuel bill? Can I breathe clean air? That. Not perfectly, not fast enough, but concretely. The old polluting economy is running out of road. And then this is where I thought it got particularly interesting. But disinformation is trying to keep it alive. Its impacts run deep. It has distorted political landscape. The multiple effects of climate change fuel fear. Disinformation then weaponizes it. Disinformation actors are opportunistic. They exploit that anxiety. Everything is blamed except for the real cause. Now, that's quite something, I think, coming in some closing remarks at a conference like that. And he says, a cop of truth is fighting back. Also means we must be realistic. So, and he's saying, with or without navigation aids, our direction is clear. The shift from fossil fuels to renewables and resilience is unstoppable.
Okay, this is where I get so frustrated with the transition. And I think we all agree on this. We actually haven't talked about this in a while. Okay, fossil fuels and using fossil fuels is inevitable for the foreseeable future. There are so many reasons as to why that is. And I get so angry at a lot of protesters and people that write these articles because they say, okay, no more fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are bad.
Yeah,
totally agree. Fossil fuels are bad. But there's ways that we can clean up those emissions, especially as we transition. And there are many communities that will still be reliant on fossil fuels. There are many products that we still use that require fossil fuels as a material. And so this really riles me up because I'm like, people just see and they think that we can rely on windmills and solar panels and nuclear and we're going to be just fine all over the world with those renewables. And I'm like, do you go outside? Do you know anything about the world and how other communities work? Or are you just in your privileged, narrow-minded bubble where you think that you can just say fossil fuels are bad, eliminate them tomorrow?
Sorry there. Lysandra, you're right. It is so wrong. I mean,
yes.
I've been involved in this for a long time, and I can remember pushing people saying, we've got to do something about energy efficiency. We've got to do something about renewables because we're facing a problem. But at no point have I ever thought that we could just go, tomorrow we won't use fossil fuels. It just isn't realistic.
Okay, and I want to put this in context for our listeners. So, and this would be in one of our podcasts, I think it was with Fortis BC. Statistic was talking about, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, that about 86% of the world's energy is based on fossil fuels, right? So we know, as Lysandra, you're saying that we need to, change, but that, as you conveyed, that's not going to happen overnight. I think we all agree there. I think where some people get frustrated, and I'm actually hearing or reading with COP30 is that actually the fossil fuel group are really trying to slow it down, the progress. I think, and that's for business sake, right? That's really the business issue. So I think,
but that's all behind the scenes, Dave. Like when you see what people are talking about, they don't think of it from that point of view. And on top of it, something that we all advocate for is efficiency, energy efficiency, just being more efficient. How often is that even talked about?
It's
just
never
let's
talked
transition.
about now.
Yeah. It's just like, let's transition into using cleaner. And again, what does clean mean? We don't even know. Let's use less emitting, sources. But are we even why are we still using the same amount?
Yeah, it's interesting, all of this. I mean, one of the things I tried looking for things that simplified what they were talking about, and I found a very simplistic chart, which I can talk you through, but it's saying climate change is putting people and the planet at risk. Okay. We must transform how we A, produce energy, B, grow food, C, build cities, D, prepare for disasters, and E, manage water. And I thought, yeah, okay, that's all fine, but it's very easy. they're the vision things, aren't they? And I think you'll get agreement probably on everybody sat round on the COP table that all of those things we've got to be doing. But it doesn't say much about what we should do with them.
It's
There
it's
is,
that detail, John. It's the detail we're missing, really.
yes, it really is. I mean, I got another thing where I looked at some of the headline things. One of the things that we haven't touched on, but there was a lot of talk in this one about what they call adaptation finance.
Yes.
And it is helping. And you know what alarmed me about this at one level? The fact that now adaptation finance is coming to the forefront. You could take that to mean that we're not winning with mitigation, and that we are inevitably facing catastrophic impacts of climate change, so we need to adapt. But it's not been said, shall we say, widely that, but so there's been that. There was no explicit reference to fossil fuels or roadmaps. There's an accelerator to report to COP31. We should be full implementation of nationally declared contributions. Number of things like that. Then there was a lot of talk about trade measures, and that got very, very complicated with a statement: unilateral trade measures should not discriminate arbitrarily. You know, we've seen somebody playing around with tariffs and seen the impact of that, and it shows you how really careful you have to be with things like tariffs, trading arrangements, and everything else like that. And there was a lot of argument about what the best possible science was, and it's suggesting they recognised the best available science as provided by the IPCC. And at one point, there was some suggestions that maybe they weren't being regarded as the best possible science. So, and yeah, and the president, the COP president, announced a Belém transition compass, which it's like a roadmap but different, apparently. So, yeah.
Okay. So I based on everything I know we have a lot more to talk about, but based on what we have heard, what we've talked about thus far, and I know this is our favorite question, is this COP process actually working or doing anything? Are we seeing a change around the world to act, because climate change is happening? Is it doing something?
Lysandra, go on, because I'm thinking.
You know, at the end of the day, I do think, like, as much as we harp on it, I personally think it's, like, too much. But I know it has to do something because, like, government officials and companies are traveling to this COP in order to talk about climate change. So that's already something on their agenda that probably wasn't on their agenda anyway, let's say. So it does bring about the topic. I just have a hard time. And, you know, we were better at tracing this in the beginning when we were doing these COP episodes. And I think it's been made more complicated just because there's so many of them. But I think you guys can recall one of the COPs was really easy to trace the year after how many of those governments actually went back and implemented any sort of regulation. And I don't know if my sources are just not in that space anymore. I don't see much of that anymore.
There's nothing obvious that you can see implementation on.
Right. Yeah. And for me, the only benefit I find about COPs, I personally think that without regulation, a lot of things won't change in a lot of countries, because if you're not forced to do it, then a lot of them are going to choose not to do it, especially when we're talking the other parts of the world, right? First world countries, I get it. When the economy is better, you do have more of a privilege to, let's say, you know, do things that are just better for your environment, your society, and things like that. When it's coming to more of like livelihood and survival, environment is very low on the list, right? You're just thinking about feeding your people, having shelter, safety, the basic fundamentals of humans. So I think it's really difficult to kind of expect too much from these. But I do appreciate that this is a 10-day experience, or however long it is, for a lot of these government officials to just solely focus on climate change. I just don't think a lot of them are taking back and doing anything regulation-wise as compared to a couple years ago.
Yeah. I was going to say, the good news is 194 parties turned up and continue to talk about it, and they're not denying that it's an issue, and they're saying we should do something about it. I've just got this feeling that if we all wait for COPs to tell us what to do, we're never going to get there.
It is the analogy of where people go to a seminar and they learn so much and they go, oh, this is fantastic, I'm going to take this back. And then they go back, and then the world's completely different, and they've forgotten everything that they learned or wanted to do, because it's not just what they do every day.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like that's, I mean, to be for everyone's benefit, like we've never been to a COP. So we're just going based on what we hear from others and what we read. I have heard, and we've actually interviewed a few people that have said, oh, it's like mind blowing, but it might be personally mind blowing, but I'm just trying to see the impact it actually does for society too.
I know somebody who went to a COP and they are involved in direct air capture of CO2, and they didn't attend any of the plenary sessions. They were involved in one of the pavilions. They talked to people. They managed to make a couple of very valuable trade I'm not going to say agreements, but yeah, one of them was an agreement, and it progressed. But you don't been digging around to try and give us some positive news, perhaps. And one of the things that came out, and it was during COP, was an analysis. Because one of the big things that people say, what's the point of us doing anything about this when you've got China? Well, for the past 18 months, China's CO2 emissions have been flat or falling. And this is from a very clear upward trend since about 2017. And they are now, it's not going off the cliff, but it is falling. And this is interesting. This is because the Chinese, they were very coal-powered and everything else. They have suddenly seen that renewable energy, electric vehicles, solar panels, wind turbines are a massive potential business. I mean, in Europe now, you don't think of buying a Tesla, you buy a Chinese EV.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And they are implementing this at home. And for the fact of a growing economy like theirs to have turned the ship, so to speak, is interesting. Now, where's 18 months is long enough to say it's a trend.
Right.
You know, it's not just a little blip, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes. And I can't help thinking that China, they're not waiting to be told what to do with a COP. They're looking at the world as it is. They're actually doing good because they see a major potential benefit to their country in doing something about climate change, albeit that you know, more and more of us will become dependent on Chinese products.
So I do want to pick up, John, what you said, because yes, they understand the economics of making money for their people, but they also figure out the ways of reducing their costs, because instead of importing coal or a more expensive commodity, they're looking at other cheaper options of operating. And so if they can use renewables, so be it. And at the same time, money. It's a combination.
So this brings up a great point. So what actually drives a government to change?
Yeah. Well,
And
okay.
in China's case, it's economics. In other governments' case, it's going to be an environmental crisis. When we saw it happen all over the world, especially these last couple of years, until there's really, public backlash, until there's these major climate events, until there's a social shift, until there's influence from other, foreign countries, these governments aren't going to change. So I do think maybe COP brings a little bit of that pressure, especially seeing other countries maybe perform. I would say I hope they do more of those case studies where, they're having countries kind of speak on it, because I do find, we all love a little competition. So maybe that would help drive other countries to perform better. But I definitely think the economic benefits is huge.
I'm going to give a slightly cynical view here. Before we started recording, I was talking about the fact that we had a budget in the UK yesterday, and there was lots of speculation about what the budget would do and what it would go for. And what is interesting is the budget itself. It tried to address some. It's a Labour government we have with a large majority, but there's some disquiet in it. So some of the measures were to keep the members of the government party happy, and then others were around, I'm going to put it bluntly, winning votes.
Yeah.
Now, if we as the electorate aren't demanding in some way that we want action, we won't get it. And it's really interesting what has happened. Energy costs in this country are increasing. It's becoming a real issue with lower income people, how much they have to spend. And we had a number of what were called green levies put on electricity bills. This government yesterday has said they're taking those off, and that will reduce the average energy bill in the UK £150. Now, the average person on the street is suddenly going to go, oh, getting rid of a green levy gives me £150 more.
Yes.
Yeah.
So because in the reading that I have, and this is not any groundbreaking thing. So ultimately what we're saying, it comes down to politics and who is in government and who gives them power to stay in power.
Yes.
Right. I'm sorry we use the U.S. administration quite frequently, but if you look at prior to the existing administration, they were going down a certain renewable front, and that seemed to be quite fine. And then the other administration has a completely different point of view, and quite frankly, really likes fossil fuel industry, and so they're going down that path. It's so politically, and that what it means, John, is I think what we've always been saying is the only way that's going to change is when the end user becomes really
absolutely
knowledgeable enough to actually understand what is real and how it impacts them directly. And I think that's...
And that comes back to that piece in the Secretary's comments about weaponized disinformation. So I don't know about you now. Here's the thing. Because we're in this, I think we've all done the thing. Oh, I'll make sure my news feeds are following COP30. It was interesting. There's a media company here or group, and they did a very interesting thing. For £5, no big deal, you could join a WhatsApp group, a private, a WhatsApp group that was giving you all updates on what was going on COP, which was really quite useful and quite interesting. Did you get anything on your main headline news over the 2 weeks?
Lysandra, I don't know what your thoughts are. Now, I've been pretty preoccupied with some stuff, but I saw less coverage. And maybe it was just because what I've been doing, less coverage than ever. Lysandra, how about you?
I barely saw anything. I didn't get even like the news notifications. I don't remember seeing COP30 in any of the headlines. And then I saw even on like LinkedIn, and again, because we do this podcast, a lot of our guests, we end up connecting with them, and a lot of them are big into the COP30 space. I found less of them posted anything, less of them attended this year. So it just seemed like maybe just, again, that's our network, right? We're talking about our network, what we see, what news we're subscribed to. And personally, I didn't see much.
In my news feed, the one thing that popped its head above the horizon was the fire.
Yes, yeah.
Right. John, I saw that on our Canadian Broadcast Corporation. I saw that.
Yeah. So, yeah, we have to say, I think we keep, you said, oh, we're doing the same, but we're not doing the same, but we're coming to the same conclusion because we've got a whole different set of material to look at, and we're coming to the same conclusion. It's really good that 194 parties meet and agree on the fundamental. Yeah. Excellent. Mm-hmm. But we've been doing that for 30 COPs. We got the Paris Agreement, 1.5. Current science says you're not going to get 1.5. You're going to be lucky if it's 2.5.
That's right. That's correct.
So, yeah, it's a frustration, isn't it? And I think I find myself thinking, what was it, Greta Thunberg on one of the COPs? She went, it's blah, blah, blah. And she's not wrong at one level. But if we don't have that, and I think it goes back to one of your points, Lysandra, if we don't have something like that, that's a bit of potential pressure, maybe peer group pressure that can be applied to some countries that might get them to move the dial a bit.
We're going to have to do a summary of our summaries of COPs and see if we keep coming back to the same issues.
We really do. I can remember all of our conversations because I really do enjoy these episodes, but I will say we're like the least energetic about this year's, and I think that reflects based on what this year's COP brought. Like it was kind of a bit of nothing on our end, but that might be great, right? Like that might be meaning more things were happening and being taken away. Like as we're not in these meetings, we don't know if, let's say, these parties then go back and they're like, okay, so for COP31, we need to have all of this prepared. We need to meet these targets. We don't know what their meetings are like. I hope that this would at least drive some of those conversations. That is really my only positive that I see out of COP30.
Yeah, I mean, we mustn't forget that a lot of work has been done on various underlying elements. of it. We're not saying, I think it would be wrong to say that nobody has been working hard. A lot of people have been working hard trying to make things happen. And there is a wealth of material that comes out of the COPs, which is interesting and useful. But I think there's no way. I mean, I was with some friends this morning doing something, and I said, "Oh, I've got to be away by so and so." And they said, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm doing a podcast on COP30," and then it was, "What's COP30?"
Exactly.
And I just sort of said, "Oh,
Did you
it's a
chuckle?
climate change conference." "Oh, that's a waste of time, isn't it?" And I thought, but I did actually, I usually really enjoy going through all the paperwork, trying to find something different, something interesting, and it did feel like it was harder work this year.
Yeah.
I mean, the two interesting bits that to me were the thing about gender, and the thing also, three things: gender, misinformation being weaponized, and the fact that military emissions aren't included.
That, yeah. Actually, those are really good and interesting facts, John. Really.
Yeah, but yeah, is our, well, we're saying here, because we had a budget yesterday, so we're all going, how's this going to impact us? And I mean, most of us are looking at it and going, not really much. COP30, how's it going to impact us? Not really much.
Well, on that note, John, what is your biggest takeaway?
My biggest takeaway is, I think they're continuing to avoid progress, but that's because of the nature of the beast. I'm not sure we need them every year. I think it would be good if the virtual element of it could be increased. Yeah, we haven't talked about this, but the next two, just for interest, and I should bring them up. COP31 is in Antalya in Turkey, but COP32 is really interesting. It's going to be in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And if I'm right, I think it's the first time a less developed country has played host to a COP.
That would be interesting.
But I don't want to say this, but I'm going to say my biggest takeaway is same old, same old. What we've got to do is pick through what's there and see what is useful and can help us going forward.
Good takeaway there. Dave, what's your biggest takeaway?
I've already said a little earlier, but I won't state that. I think instead of keep planning, we now need to start implementing. And I know we just said before how fossil fuels will play a critical part, because they do. But we're going to have to figure out ways economically where they can, whether it's energy efficiency, which we talked about briefly. That's a forgotten piece of talking points for anywhere, well, at least certainly in Canada. I'm going to say in Canada. I don't know about John and Europe and stuff, but
no, I think the whole thing, energy efficiency, it did get a mention last year / Glasgow. There were some mentions of it, but it hasn't been strengthened as one of the sort of pathways.
yeah. So I think the idea of literally execution and measuring execution and saying, this is what we said we were going to do. What did we do? And talk about what has been accomplished every year. Like that would be helpful for me, because it feels like blah, 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 blah. And I don't know what actually happens. I don't know if I can't see a measurable change in what's going on. Lysandra, how about you?
Yeah, I think for me, I like the concept of roadmaps. I'm glad that they're being introduced. I do hope that in these COPs, there's a bit of, peer pressure, government to government, party to party. But besides that, this one was a little underwhelming for me, which might be a good thing. Maybe there's real work going on in the background and there's not flashy headlines. I don't think we touched on it at all, but I think there was some discussion around like greenwashing and terminology and things like that.
Oh yeah, there's a whole lot of trying to and looking at measures of adaptation. How can you have indicators for it? And all of this stuff is relevant stuff. Did it need to be at COP? Could it be something that's going on in parallel outside of COP? Is there a way we could strip COP back to being real punchy, implementation focused? That would be ideal.
And we did talk so certainly China's all over this, but if you look at the other major economies, such as the US, if they're not active, does that slow down the rest of the world? And the answer, I think, would be yes. So how does that impact this progress as well? That's the other thing I'm wondering.
It's a good point, because what we shouldn't say, but people will tend to say, And it was the China argument. That's why I brought the China one into it, because I know so many people have gone, with China doing all what they're doing, what's the point of us doing anything? But I think all of us can do something. And here's the thing, going right back to where we are, if you do it right, it's cost effective.
Yes.
And to do it right, we need more energy literacy.
It always comes back to the same thing.
It really does. All right, Dave and John, thanks for another great episode.
It's been a blast.
Hey, you know what? We should do this more often.
Once a year.
See you next year. All right, have a great day.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts. See you next week.